We now return to decisive battles. The Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BC. The Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II is battling the Hittite Empire for control of Syria. The Raykor infantry had been cut to pieces. There was little the charioteers at the front could do. Then they saw another mass of Hittite chariots headed straight for Ramses' camp. They galloped to warn the pharaoh and made it to the camp just in time.
Ramses was still in his tent, still shouting at his generals, still trying to apportion blame and sort out the mess, when suddenly there was an influx of Egyptian chariots followed by 2,500 Hittite chariots, and it was just complete panic.
The Hittite chariot crashed through the defenses, and a bloody fight began with the defending infantry. But as they rolled into the camp, they were slowed down by the numbers of tents and equipment. Chariots collided with one another in a confined space.
There is blood, there is dust, there is looting, because Egyptian gold and silver artifacts were very valuable throughout the Near East.
The chariots were now caught in a huge traffic jam. Even worse, the Hittite chariots had been so eager to charge into the Egyptian camp that they had left their infantry far behind. The Hittite infantry outnumbered the Egyptian soldiers by 2 to 1, but they were nowhere near the battle. Egyptian archers began firing into the massive chariots. Egyptian foot soldiers hauled the Hittites from the chariots by their long hair and slashed them across the throat. The slaughter was constant and brutal. Now Ramses took control. Seizing his chance, he led the remainder of his chariots out of his camp at a fast gallop and swept round in an arc in a counterattack on the Hittites.
There were only two things to do. One was to hope that reinforcements would somehow appear. The other was to charge straight at the Hittite lines and show how brave you are. Ramses was naive, he was misguided in many ways, but he was brave. He prays to the warrior god, who he calls his father, and pleads that he will not desert him in his critical hour. Then he charges.
Luck was on Ramses' side. With incredible timing, the chariots of the elite division from the coast arrived to join the battle. They had sped on ahead, leaving the infantry behind.
Ramses was moved from a position of being very much the underdog to having elite troops burst on the scene, frighten the wits out of the Hittites who didn't know they were there. Suddenly the whole battle turned around. Of course, the Hittites had no idea how many more troops there might be out there.
The Hittite chariot teams were exhausted, were being cut to pieces by powerful arrows from thousands of composite bows. The lighter Egyptian chariots were faster and more stable than their enemies. Keeping out of range of the Hittites' javelins, they fired volley after volley of arrows into the densely packed chariots.
What the Egyptians can do is fire arrows at them, and they cannot maneuver and fight back. It is what is called a turkey shoot.
Every time the Hittites tried to get a grip on the Egyptians, they were driven back by the hail of arrows. There was nothing left but to make a break for it. The retreat turned into a headlong rush for safety. Broken chariots and screaming and dying horses littered the ground. The Egyptian foot soldiers following in the wake of the chariots finished off anyone they found alive. When an Egyptian soldier killed a Hittite, he would cut off the dead man's right hand. This was then taken to the pharaoh as proof of victory. After the battle, the pile of hands was counted to calculate the number of enemy dead. The Egyptian system of military organization had almost lost the battle. Thousands of soldiers had been strung out over miles of desert. The pharaoh had never been able to gather all his troops together and throw his full military might against the Hittites. But things had been worse for Muwatalli. He had brought 40,000 Hittite infantry to Kadesh. None of them fought in the battle. Both he and Ramses had fought a completely different battle than the one they had planned for. Ramses could not hope to hold territory in Syria with his small army. He fell back to Egypt and eventually signed a peace treaty with the Hittites. Later, he took 2 Hittite princesses as wives. This resulted in peace and prosperity throughout the area for the next 90 years.
I think from the Kadesh battle inscriptions, we get a genuine sense that he stepped out of the mythology. He stopped being the demigod, and he actually became a man who was on a battlefield and who was frightened and yet managed to fight his way out of danger.
If the Hittites had won, the entire area of what we call Palestine would have fallen under their rule. Large parts of the Bible are to do with Egypt. We might not have had any of that. We wouldn't even have the Bible in the form in which it's written for us. It might have been written in Hittite.
Ramses himself ruled for another 70 years, giving Egypt a rare period of continuity. During his long life, he took 200 wives, had 96 sons and 60 daughters, and his luck held. Throughout his reign, the Nile regularly flooded, giving good harvests. But in 1274 BC, none of this had been certain. Ramses knew that the Battle of Kadesh had played a big part in making it possible. The young pharaoh had made his reputation and secured Egypt's borders, and he never wanted his people to forget it.
He ordered the walls of his temple here at Luxor, the Ramesseum, to be inscribed with scenes from the battle. Today, more than 3,000 years later, people come from all over the world to read the story of Ramses and the Battle of Kadesh.